The Zone Coverage Podcast Network.
We're recording now.
We are?
It's live.
I didn't say I was ready. Wolves Wired. I'm not ready. I'm here with, not David Naylor. I'm here with Dane Moore and Tom Schreier. David Naylor's in Des Moines. Iowa Wolves season is over, but he's down there.
Shucking corn.
He's down there scouting anyway. He's scouting local talent. I don't know what he's doing down there.
Hanging out with Perry Jones III, that was the biggest shock to me that he was on the Iowa Wolves.
That was crazy.
And what looked actually pretty good. Or big. I don't know.
He looked tall. He had that going for him. I don't remember him looking particularly great. Anyway, in the NBA, where Perry Jones no longer plays, the Timberwolves played a couple games, one of which was called, I think, the biggest game that they've had in years, et cetera, et cetera. In fact, I think every game going down the road is going to be their biggest game in years. The first of which was to the Denver Nuggets. They lost by 4. That game following... or the next game they played, the Los Angeles Lakers, they won that game. Had the Wolves won against Denver on Thursday and then followed up with a win against the Lakers on Friday. I think they would have clinched right now. But they lost to Denver, so the playoff race is it's crazy right now.
Well, it was kind of interesting how, the Denver game was, I guess it was only a 4-point game, but if you say that those are 4 bad quarters because it was a loss, and they weren't, the Wolves did not play well in that game.
No.
And then it was 2 more quarters of bad against the Lakers. And at halftime, I started Googling who the most recent late lottery picks were.
Dude.
To look up who, I was like, what does the 13th or 14th pick normally get? And then, to the Wolves' credit, they came out and were dominant in the third quarter and the second half, and they completely took care of business. Obviously, Jimmy Butler returned, and it is just night and day different how the team functions with him. It pops off the screen. You put up two Timberwolves basketball game. Literally on back-to-back nights of.
Yep.
It is a completely different tenor and just goes to the intangible value that Jimmy Butler has.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Tom.
Well, I was going to say my observation here is that the Wolves occasionally do sleepwalk a little bit. The Denver game looked right.
I'm thinking of one particular character.
But
Marcus Georges Hunt.
Don't pick on Marcus. If he's sleeping, it's because he hasn't played in 10 games.
Well, it's not because he's tired.
Yeah. But no, they appear to be sleepwalking. And even that Grizzlies game, it kind of went from a sleepwalk to the last few minutes. They were kind of a little panicky or uptight, right?
Sure.
And Jimmy Butler just seems to ignore all that. He would not get uptight. He doesn't sleepwalk. Clearly, he is kind of the motor that makes them go. And I thought that was kind of the second half of the Laker game.
And he did bring that at the beginning of the Lakers game too.
The first minute.
Yeah, right.
He was freelancing on defense. He got 2 steals in the first minute of the game. And I think just right off of the bat, people were reminded of what he can do defensively and how impactful he can be. And the plays he can make offensively as a result of his plays defensively.
There's almost some imposter to that, too. You saw him come... he had... that kind of came from the weak side and stole it from Brook Lopez.
Yep.
And then you saw Jeff Teague doing that kind of throughout the rest of the game, and that's not a novel activity or whatever, sending a second guard to double or to try to intercept an entry pass or whatever. But you don't see that. It's so much less common in the Butlerless games, and I don't know. Is that they see Jimmy doing it and then they trust in themselves that they can? It's weird because Jimmy Butler just doesn't affect the game through his own ability. He affects it through the way in which he convinces the other players that they can be more than they are.
He does establish a mentality, and it's totally why Tibbs wanted him, right?
Sure.
There's just something, the man yelling at you, on the sideline, cannot impact you in the same way I think a player can. That's your peer, right?
Yeah.
So,
but what about Taj Gibson? I would say Taj Gibson's also that way, where it's that energy, that the effectiveness, effort, all that, but it doesn't seem to transcend Taj in the way that it does Jimmy.
And that's a good question. I don't really have an answer for that.
Do you think part of it's just I mean, Taj Gibson knows what to do, and he plays smart basketball. He has a high basketball IQ. He goes out and does the right thing, and when his teammates don't do the right thing, he holds them accountable and calls them out. Like, we've seen him do that all year.
Sure.
Jimmy Butler does all of that, but then is also like a superstar player and just does does extraordinary things that might it might just get you going if you're his teammate a little bit more than Taj, who simply does his job. Is the going above and beyond what it is?
Maybe. It has to be. It's something more than leading by example.
Yeah, exactly.
That he does, because, again, Taj was great. Taj was great in both games.
He was.
And has been, largely for the whole season, and is, kind of equally an energizer for the team. But Jimmy Butler has an effect on the players that make them want to emulate him. And
it really happens when he's playing. Like, he was on the sidelines for the Memphis game, and they lost. Now, I'm not blaming Jimmy Butler, but they lost that game, right? And they didn't kind of adapt to the mentality. Same thing kind of with Denver, right?
Yeah.
And I do worry a little bit. It's all this late season stuff is a little bit residual effect of the minutes they've played. Like, this is at some point, it has been a conversation. It's something that's going to resurface unless they maybe go to the second round of the playoffs. I mean, otherwise it's going to come up.
Okay, one thing I've been thinking about is, minutes, that's an issue for sure. But do you think minutes are an issue at all with Andrew Wiggins and Karl Towns?
No.
I don't think so either. I mean, and obviously there's some youth there, so I guess it's fair to be frustrated with the minutes and the amount that the players are playing, but not in an absolute term, like where it adversely affects all of them, because I don't see it affecting Karl Towns or Andrew Wiggins, and they've said as much too. That like Andrew said numerous times, he's like, I get how people are tired, but he's like, I'm still young. It's not something that playing 37 minutes doesn't affect me in that sort of way. So I don't know. I think Jeff Teague might be the one who
Taj at times looks dog tired.
Yeah, he seems to kind of push through it and remain effective. I think Jeff Teague, it obviously sticks out too that he's kind of been perpetually dinged up this year, and it's easy to draw that parallel. Whether that's fair or not, I'm not sure. Because sometimes injuries are.
I mean, his injuries happened at the beginning of the year too, and they were just. I feel like they were a little bit fluky.
He missed 2 games.
He had like a knee thing, and then he had
the wrist, right?
A wrist, yeah, that was
shoulder,
the other one.
Maybe, or elbow. I can't remember.
Head, shoulders, knees, and toes. Yeah. He's gotten them all. Speaking of minutes, I found it interesting, and maybe it was just a reaction to the game itself. Jimmy Butler's return is going to bring fewer minutes to somebody, and I'm dropping the Derrick Rose bomb today.
Yeah, he got the grenade in hand.
Derrick Rose played 6 poor minutes in the first half against Los Angeles and did not return in the second half, and I wonder if that's based on his performance or if it's based on Butler's return or if it's a combination. But regardless, Butler's minutes had been trending up, or not Butler, Rose's minutes have been trending up regardless of his production, but that stopped against Los Angeles, and I don't know, I found that really interesting.
Well, I think it's a matter of positions or roles. They in the Wolves offense, the 2 and the 3 is completely interchangeable. We see that with Andrew Wiggins and Jimmy Butler, and then also
Jamal Crawford.
And Jamal Crawford is also in that too. So you take one of those 3 out of the equation, and you need to put in a 2 or 3, and an extra 2 or 3. And Derrick Rose has been that guy. He has been the additional wing to play. The minutes, I mean, are going to go away because Jimmy Butler is a 2 or 3 who, when healthy, is going to play 38 minutes. So I think it's. Well, one, it's still kind of an interesting development for me to think of, Derrick Rose is just purely a shooting guard now, I guess. Like, that's weird. He's always been a point guard.
But that's the right usage, at least how the roster is constructed.
How the roster is constructed. And, if Tibbs sticks to that, then Derrick Rose's role is going to be small. And what we were talking about in previous weeks was concern that Derrick Rose might cut into the playoff rotation minutes of Tyus Jones or something.
Yeah.
And I think, again, it's one game, but if we're extrapolating off of that, it might suggest that Tyus does have that backup role for the playoffs.
Yeah.
If they get there.
If they get there, which, I mean, what is it? If they beat Memphis on Monday and Portland beats Denver on Monday, they're in.
So the Clippers are out, right? We know that. And it's basically Denver's the threat to enter the picture.
Correct. So I think they're tied right now after last night. But
with Denver.
With Denver, I'm sorry. Yeah.
And so this is as of, we're recording this on Sunday, but this should stay.
Neither team plays till Monday night.
No team in the group plays other than Utah.
Which is hardly part of the group anymore, right?
Exactly, yeah.
They're pretty comfortably the 4 right now.
I know. I think that's kind of what our operating assumption should be is Houston 1, Golden State 2, Portland 3, Utah 4.
God, New Orleans is the 5 right now. That's crazy. But yeah, just to recap Minnesota's situation, if I'm not mistaken, David Naylor's, again, not here to do this for me because he just knows how this stuff like the back of his hand. Minnesota and Denver are tied right now. Minnesota plays Memphis on Monday. Denver plays Portland. If Portland beats Denver, which they want to seal up the 3 seed.
Yep, they do have incentive. Yep.
They lose the tiebreaker to Minnesota no matter what happens in the season finale. So if Minnesota beats Memphis and Portland goes out and does their job against Denver, the Wolves are in.
Yeah.
No matter what. And there's a few other scenarios, but essentially, they want to beat Memphis. That's what it comes down to. It would be really nice to beat Denver as well, but there are scenarios where beating Denver won't matter.
The way I'm kind of thinking of it as is the 8 and 9 is kind of this interchangeable between Minnesota and Denver.
Yep.
And then, to be determined. And then there's kind of the 4, 5, 6 group. And one of those 3 teams, that's obviously a way better spot to be in than the 7 or 8 because you don't have to play Houston or Golden State. But there's that 4, 5, 6, and one of the teams is going to fall out of the 4, 5, 6 and into that Minnesota-Denver bunch.
So as in 4, 5, 6, 7, you mean, right?
Well, I think that Minnesota and Denver are in the 7 and 8.
I see.
That. So
okay.
I guess what I'm doing is I'm taking it. There's this tier up of Houston, Golden State, Portland, a middle tier 4, 5, 6, and then there's 7, 8, 9.
Got it. Okay.
And I think
I've been looking at it as 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5 through 9.
Right.
Personally, because last night, Friday night, the Wolves didn't play. The Thunder, Spurs, and Pelicans all played and they all played the top 3 teams in the West. None of them won. Yeah. None of the top 3 teams won. But had they won, the Wolves would be the 5 seed right now. Yeah. So, I don't know.
That's why I've struggled with this speculating the whole time.
So
it's hard to do because everything could change.
So a couple of thoughts here. We do know there's parity in the NBA, and I think this has been evident for a while now, but it's really coming in the fore now because didn't the Sixers just beat the Cavs, right?
The Sixers are better than the Cavs, though.
But either way, you would have thought in the beginning of the season, Cavs are better than the Sixers, right?
Oh, sure.
And Thunder beat the Rockets, and then who did the Pelicans beat?
Pelicans beat the Warriors.
Yeah. So, I mean, and again, any given game, all this, I think it's good for the league. We went back to you don't need the fun as hell tournament or whatever when that happens under the current structure.
It's been like that.
And there's a reason to turn on TNT or ESPN any night that there's an NBA game, which is good for the league. I think this explains a lot. However, I'm curious if there's that John Krasinski stat where they're like, if they had won 5 of the 8 games against the 4 worst teams in the East and then not lost to Phoenix and Memphis twice, that they'd be secure in the 4 seed, or at least at the time. This was after the Memphis loss.
Oh, they would. I mean, that's 5. They're 0-8 against the worst teams in the
NBA.
East. Or in the NBA.
Yeah.
And if they win 5 of the 8 of those, I mean, literally that would put them at 50 wins right now.
Important narrative, right?
Yeah.
And then there's the minutes thing, which just from the day Tibbs was hired, you knew that was going to be talked about. Mm-hmm. Does that stuff get emphasized if they make the 5-6 seed or even somehow make the 4? Or do you think that's only a narrative if you're 7 or 8 and you're out of there pretty quick?
I think it's the 7 and 8. I think that's what they're optically dealing with right now is why why the fan base is so on edge is because there's been the optics of they were the 3 or 4 seed for the majority of the season.
And then it's not just quote-unquote playoff experience. It's you could win a series.
Which is, in my opinion, much more important than making the 7 or the 8. So, I think they struggle from narrative as is because they've kind of backed their way down in the West. No matter what. Had they been, though, at the bottom of the West the whole year, had they been the 6, 7, 8 the whole year, I think that has a very big different.
I just think we should talk about it anyways. Like, you should not lose to Memphis twice.
Yeah.
You shouldn't lose to Phoenix twice.
And I wonder how
Memphis going for the sweep on Monday.
Which is unbelievable.
Oh, man. I saw John Krasinski tweeted something. I think I said this on a previous pod, but like they have like 9 really bad losses to like tanking level teams. And if they had won half of those, they'd be the 3 seed right now.
Yeah,
or something
that's what Tom was going at.
That's crazy. But like, to answer your question, I think I wonder how fan perception would have been had they not been in that 3-4 slot all year. If it had fluctuated like it has been fluctuating throughout the year, because I mean, even when they were the 3-4, it was always by like a game, a half game, a game and a half, 2 games. It was never a giant lead. They never had like a 5-game lead on the 5 seed. You know what I mean? And like if they had just dipped a little bit, if Oklahoma City had just played a little better at the beginning of the year, or Utah hadn't lost Gobert or something,
right.
I wonder how they would have been perceived by the fans and or how Tibbs would have been perceived and all that other stuff.
I think it completely changes the whole narrative.
I do think, though, what would have formed then is Tibbs is all in right now, right? We said over and over, this is not a young team, even though Towns and Wiggins themselves are young. I think they're not both Towns. Unless something changed recently. But I mean,
I'll go to practice today and find out.
Can you imagine that question?
Andrew, are you Carl?
Are you turning into Carl Anthony Towns?
Well, Andrew's go-to response any question is definitely. Definitely. That's what he says there.
I logged in as Towns once in Fortnite. Does that count? Anyway, sorry.
Oh God!
But Jimmy Butler not guaranteed to be with the team long term, right? There's something about Tibbs' tactics that seem immediate and right now. I think there's also Taj is getting older. Teague's an older player. You know, you got to make decisions on Bjelica and Jones soon. Tyus Jones soon. So I think if they were just stuck in the 7-8 seed all season, you'd be like, what? Like,
so you're suggesting that being in the 3 or 4 seed earlier this year,
it's almost expected. Hope. Yeah. Maybe expected's too strong, but like that's the goal. If you really have immediate, if you're built to win now.
Well, I mean, let's be real. That what more could have they done than been the 3 this year?
Right. Completely.
Anything more than that would have been.
There was a point. Do you remember that one point where they were like 2.5 games behind Houston?
Yeah.
They had Houston the next day, and then Houston just erased every shred of hope that they were a top 3 team or a top 2 team in that tier.
But they were But they were the 3 seed for a long part of the season, which was literally their ceiling of the year. So they do deserve some credit for that. But I think people, have taken away some of that credit in the name of, kind of falling off so much at the end of the season, while the other middling Western Conference teams have taken off. I mean, Portland most notably has done that, who's actually lost 3 straight. But, I don't know. It's been a fascinating season from that, whole narrative standpoint, because it depends what month you catch them in, and you're more willing to forgive the minute stuff if they're the 3 or the 4. You're more willing to forgive this or that, or if when they're tied today with Minnesota and Denver are tied, then it's easy to be like, oh, let's jump on the minutes, let's jump on this and that. And I think what we've kind of learned is this all requires a grain of salt and taking a step back. And I don't know. I don't want to jump on any strong opinions until we know what the season is. We've had time to look back at it and kind of go through player by player, go through how this progressed. I mean, I know we can do some of that now, but
I mean, this is going to be kind of our writing as soon as the season ends. Mm-hmm. What is the availability of 3-point shooters? And if so, what do you have to pay to get them? And can the Wolves do that in their situation? What do you do with the guys he inherited, right? Let's take Wiggins and Towns out of the equation because they're assuming Towns is going to sign long-term. Jones, Bjelica, kind of the Gorgie, that crowd, right? Gorgie's the piece that you want to move because you want to have some space to sign guys. And then just going to your point, how much can Tibbs adjust? He is a stubborn man. At some point, does he look at Quinn Snyder and Terry Stotts, his direct competition, and go, what can I learn from what Quinn Snyder's doing? What can I learn from what Terry Stotts did midseason? Because Utah looked dead in the water to begin the year, and they're legit, right? I mean, they're not Houston, Golden State tier, but they're next, right?
Do I officially owe you a beer?
Well, did Utah? They're officially clinched.
That's what I'm asking. Are they in?
I know I don't see a little asterisk next
yet.
to them,
okay,
but
okay.
I think you might. What I think about with that, and when talking about Utah, is what if you invert the Timberwolves season and Jimmy Butler tears his meniscus the first game of the season?
That's a really good question.
You know, what does that look like to go the first 20 games without Butler? And kind of they probably would have been a well under 500 team for that first chunk.
Look at Indiana and Detroit, those 2 games early on.
Yep.
And, like Butler couldn't breathe or whatever, you know? Like, you're like, that's not good.
But then what I'm saying is, so what if that happens and then the really, I mean, then he gets healthy and he's back and he did what he, you know, what if the hot run was at the end of the season? I guess is what I'm saying is, how does that shift the narrative? What if the Timberwolves have been, they were the 11th seed for the first 2 months of the season. Butler got back and he pushed them all the way up into the playoffs. That totally changes all of it, and it's all a matter of time and happenstance. And I realize that's not what actually happened, but I don't know. I do feel like we're really getting caught up, and myself included.
I think Tibbs is always going to be criticized because he's an extremist. Like he just. You said this even with his defensive system. It's get a steal, get a block. It's not. Quinn Snyder's thought is disrupt every shot, right? Every possession.
Well, I don't. Okay, to clarify on that, I don't think that's what Tibbs thinks. I think Tibbs is smart enough to. I mean, you look at that's what Chicago did. What Chicago did, what Utah does.
Okay, that's okay.
Their goal was to limit the opponent's effectiveness, and it's silly for anyone to be like, to treat NBA defense like 4th and 1 in football. It's not a matter of like get it or you don't get it. Like it does. It's not absolutes. It's about hindering their likelihood of making the basket, taking that 50% shooter down to a 40% shooter. And that is what the Bulls did. I think the players in Minnesota embody those absolutes. And particularly, I'm thinking of Towns sticks out in that way. Yeah. And I also think Andrew Wiggins does. And even you see parts of that in the better defenders too, and Butler and the Teague also in that way. So I don't think it's Thibodeau who's saying, you need to block the shot or get the steal. Like, he's smart enough to know that. But when in the midst of play, that is particularly how Karl Towns responds. I need to stop this now.
To use another example, like, it would make sense in a vacuum to be like, play your best players as much as you possibly can because other teams don't, right? And if you have the better players for more time, but then you realize human fatigue and just kind of wear and tear. They probably play too many games anyways. 82 games is probably too many. Minnesota travels. I know Golden State does and stuff, but they travel a lot because of how the division's laid out and all that, and whatever, the middle of the country, whatever. But I think, right?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm reading.
Oh, okay.
I'm reading a tweet that's confusing me.
Anyways, the point is like, in some ways, Tibbs just takes an extreme position on things, and that's going to create a negative reaction. I think no matter what, I'm sure people in Chicago, they loved him for a bit, but I'm sure he got criticism, especially in a big media market coming after. They're kind of the next coming after Jordan and all that. Yeah.
I think Bulls Twitter, from what I've encountered, is really enjoying criticizing Tibbs from afar.
I'm sure.
I think they were frustrated. I'm sure they loved him, like you said. I'm sure they loved him.
But how it ended, it didn't end the way you thought it. You thought Derrick Rose was going to be great until he was 35 or whatever, and you thought that this team was going to compete with the Heat. Mm-hmm. And if you would have told someone back when the Bulls were good, by the way, the Heat won't be good in a few years, and you guys are not going to go where you in fact, your guys are going to end up in Minnesota. They'd be like, wait, what?
If you would have told Bulls fans 4 years ago that Jimmy Butler and Derrick Rose would be Timberwolves with Tom Thibodeau, Joakim Noah wouldn't be able to move up the crappy Knicks bench, and Luol Deng is like doing drills in the locker room because they won't play him in Los Angeles, they wouldn't have believed you. It's crazy how everything has changed for them.
What I wish I could have knowledge of is I wish I covered the Chicago Bulls in 2011-12 and saw the positives of the Thibodeau system and all these characteristics he has. in a non-incriminating way, because it was working. It was great.
Coach of the year.
And not only that, but he made it, and I do think this is important for the Wolves generally, he made it an event in Chicago, which is difficult. It's a big city, a lot going on, at least from my experience going to a handful of games each season.
Yeah.
It's not just 23,000 or whatever. They call it the Madhouse in Madison, right? But it's like you go to a bar, you grab a hot dog, and you're like, oh my God, this line is full of people with Rose jerseys or Bulls jerseys or whatever. And I think the Wolves are he's starting to kind of crack that, and I think that's as important as anything. Make the Wolves relevant again. It's kind of what he needs to do.
It's like when Dane and I went to Cleveland, man. Like the Cavs aren't. I mean, they're title contenders this year because LeBron's on their team, but it's not the same.
When we were there, it was really a lull too. It was really when things were going bad.
It was even in the press room, like pregame coaches availability at the Target Center. We've all been there. It's like just a group of people standing and waiting for Tibbs, and then we go over and we talk to the opposing coach. It's like a giant press room in Cleveland for Tyronn Lue. Like, it's a madhouse. And when you go out to the arena, it's insane. It's crazy.
College,
it's
right?
an event.
Yeah.
That's exactly
everyone was drunk. Like, it was a Wednesday night, and everyone was like...
I mean, that might be Cleveland, but...
Well, maybe, but I'm just saying it was so polarizing to, all my experiences at Target Center. And the Cavs were in the worst spot they've been in 5 years.
Yep.
But the fans were into that game the whole time, and... Yeah, so I don't really know how we got to that from Tibbs. But
the point I was trying to make was it was an event there, and I guess I was just comparing.
Yeah, sure.
And I was saying Tibbs needs to. It's actually a negativity is not a bad thing because it means people apathy is the worst thing for a sports team, and outside of diehard basketball fans, people were apathetic about the Wolves, right? You're not crushed when they lose for like the X amount of season in a row, right? And I think of the Warriors too. Now, the Warriors sold out when they were bad, so it's a little different, but they, in San Francisco, which you think of like tech and other non-basketball things, right? Yeah. They're everywhere, right? You see flags, you see jerseys, this and that. And the Wolves should be able to do it here in a sports mad market that I think there's been a ton of Wolves fans or basketball fans that have just been like, look, I got to root for another team because this is just not even fun,
Breaking news, sports fans at large are fair weathered.
Right.
Like that's what it comes down to.
Yeah.
But that's what Thibodeau's trying to do. What Thibodeau's strategy is I'm going to bring that through winning. I'm not going to bring that through
charm.
Rah. Well, it's certainly not that. Yeah.
Well, it's the non-Flip Saunders strategy, which is very like embrace the brand, build the brand, and develop the youngsters. Whereas Tibbs is going at it hard right now. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, even Flip, I mean, some people forget, but Flip Saunders, I don't know how, he must have just sold it better, but Flip Saunders was famous for playing his starters a ton of minutes, too, whether that was with the Wolves, his second time around, or his first time around, or in Detroit. Like, everywhere he went, he played his starters a ton of minutes, too, but the perception of him was always different.
That's another time machine I wish I could get in. One, to go see Tom Thibodeau in 2011, 12, or 10, 11, to see that and better understand him in the good way. But I also wish I could take a time machine and cover the NBA in 2002, when we've done this exercise on the podcast before, where it's like, name a team and a year in the early 2000s, and you'll find their best player averaging 41 minutes per game.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's how the NBA existed for a very long time. And so it's like I wish I could go back into that time and understand what the positives were of that too.
Right.
Just like I wish I could go back to 2010 to understand what the positives of Thibodeau were. And I think maybe Tibbs' flaw is that he does understand what the positives of those were. He lived that. He was in New York when Patrick Ewing was averaging 41 minutes a game, or he was he was in Houston when T-Mac was averaging 40 a game. He was there in Chicago in 2010, where his style formed this Chicago Bulls team into something that was objectively great. And I mean, it's my opinion that doesn't work anymore, but at the same time, I understand why he does what he does, because he's had success doing it before. That's human nature. We go back to things that have worked for us in the past.
And I think his preference, going back to what Tim said, is win and everything takes care of itself, right? I think why maybe this is becoming a big deal here is that Brett Brown sells his program, right?
Yeah.
Billy Donovan does, although that's different. That's with older players. But Steve Kerr certainly does. I don't know where does D'Antoni? Where do you put him there? Do you think he does?
Well, Daryl Morey does for them.
Daryl Morey does for them, and then
there's an openness. They're knowable.
But I think the guys who ride in the middle would be Terry Stotts. Quinn Snyder might be almost more kind of on the Tibbs end of that scale, right? And then I see Brad Stevens as someone who's well regarded, which is hard to do in Boston, where everyone's kind of cynical and negative. But I don't know if he's a salesman of his program. He seems more kind of like.
But he's honest, dude.
Yeah,
he's honest,
that's
dude,
fair.
and that's
fair.
That's what I took.
Accessible.
He's accessible, and that's what I've taken away from my experience. I've been there to talk to Terry Stotts this year. I've been there to talk to Quinn Snyder, and I've been there to talk to Brad Stevens. And even if it's not an active salesman in the way Flip was,
right.
They are earnest and authentic in what their answers are. They will accentuate the positive and the negative, and be real with you as to what that is. And to some extent, that doesn't necessarily matter that much to be real to the media. But then when you open up this window, that is how fans perceive. That is how they get to know people. It's through the media and through that camera that is filming that interaction
which is more relevant than ever, because before there was 2 cameras, right? There was both teams had their affiliates. Mm-hmm. Now there's 10 because everyone has a cell phone, right?
Yes.
And not only that, but it's like, with our method here, we don't really write straight gamers. We're really looking at it as in your lens through like the actual gameplay and film, and for us it's more anecdotally talking to the players, talking to Tibbs or whatever. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have that and shut it off, people assume something's wrong. I think that's the assumption.
Well, okay, another example to Brett Brown, which I think is really interesting, is to draw the Sam Hinkie parallel.
Yes.
And the Sam Hinkie parallel is that the process was logically right. Sam Hinkie never talked to anyone at all. He was not noble. He was not accessible. And he didn't make it known what was happening. So the fan base that isn't educated enough to understand the value of a pick swap or gathering multiple second-round picks or how the odds of the lottery work, without making that be known, the fans just saw we won 12 games again this year.
Well, or like Golden State probably explained how they got Jordan Bell, which that's a positive, obviously, but it's like, wait, you just bought him? Like, that's ridiculous.
But Sam Hinkie, I mean, Tibbs is doing what Sam Hinkie's doing. He is forced to, like, by league bylaws, be forced to talk to us, but he's also not talking.
Yeah, if you say play to your strengths, cover your weakness, unless you explain
over and over.
Right. I mean, that's
again,
not really not really saying. Now he's insightful occasionally, maybe accidentally, but you have to wade through a lot of fat to get through it.
Yes.
And I think the better comparison is Daryl Morey and Sam Hinkie, because Daryl Morey could have been like Billy Beane early on. If you guys saw Moneyball, he was criticized for thinking about baseball mathematically, right?
Sure.
And I see Daryl Morey as first of all. He's kind of actually like the Astros, right? Both play in the same market, 4th largest market. They have a little money to spend. The Astros basically took kind of what the A's were doing and did it just with a lot more money. Mm-hmm. I think the Red Sox and some other teams did that too. The basketball parallel would be Daryl Morey and what he's doing with Houston. And it seems like he's very well received because he's buddies with Bill Simmons. He's probably open to local media. Mm-hmm. I'm sure he makes Sports Center appearances and stuff like that.
He interacts with journalists like digitally.
He follows me on Twitter.
Yeah.
There you go. He follows Dane on Twitter.
Well, he follows, but
he follows a lot of writers on Twitter. No, exactly. That's my point. Like, he's accessible, and people can reach out to him and know that he'll respond.
And you can win and be accessible because Houston may win the championship this year, right? Or at least they're in a contender spot.
So
right
if the Wolves were a top 2 team, if Tom Thibodeau coached the Rockets, for example, how accessible would he be? How accessible was he in Chicago?
And that's why I want to go in the time machine.
There's people you can ask, and actually, I might even. Inquire
I mean, kind of, and I have to some degree, but it's kind of one of those things that you like.
How you remember it is how it was at the end.
Or you kind of had to be there for it. I feel like, and I don't know, maybe that's not true. I didn't mean that I actually meant that as a compliment to Tibbs, because I think what Sam Hinkie was doing was brilliant, and maybe what Tibbs is doing, maybe Tibbs is brilliant. Like, you ask a lot of other people. I
think he's smart, hands down.
I mean, and a lot of people who know a lot more about basketball than we do would say that Tom Thibodeau is smart. He was Coach K had him on the whatever list off.
No. And I think let's go to this. He had the sabbatical, right, where he's basically being paid by Chicago and decided to go to. It was fired. Went to every team. I mean, he's talking to Popovich, and you saw him after that game where Pop crushed him. Right, he's sitting there joking with Greg Popovich. He saw how Kerr ran his system. He I'm sure he was with Houston. I don't know if he saw Stotts and Quinn Snyder. I guess I don't remember if that ever came up. But he sees how all these guys do it, and he chooses to do it this way. In some ways, you play to your personality. In some ways, it's just, I do think he's impulsive, and he's like, people are criticizing me now.
I don't think he was learning. I don't think he was there learning. I think he was there because
on a
he loves...
consultant basis, I think is what they do, right?
Well, and I think he's just a basketball junkie, and we wanted to be around basketball. And
that for sure is true.
And I think that's what was going on. He already knew how he wants to do things because he's had success in it. Again, he had success.
I think when coaches get fired, generally speaking, they do this. They go on these tours, but I think they're called consulting tours. Like was it Mike Malone, Dave Yeager, one of those two?
I bet Fizdale does something.
Fizdale,
right?
A lot of them will go team to team, and because the head coach of that team will ask them to come in. And
which means you're smart and have something
on the outside looking in. Like, hey, what do you see that maybe we're missing? Flip Saunders did that. A lot of coaches do that. So I assume people are. I mean, Tom Thibodeau, maybe especially before he was hired here, was considered probably the defensive guru of the NBA. So I would imagine that teams like San Antonio would want to hear from him.
And he's still regarded as that.
Yeah.
Not on Twitter, but he is.
Amongst the coaching circle, I'm sure he is.
I mean, I really think he does. And I want to know in their heart of hearts if they think maybe some of the system is antiquated. I don't know, but I think there still is an overwhelming respect for Tom Thibodeau as the mind. And that's again, what I'm saying with the Sam Hinkie is maybe it would be different. Maybe we wouldn't be as harsh on Tom Thibodeau if he let us know what he was doing.
No, for sure. Terry Ryan, for example, with the Twins, because he was so accessible, got a pass until it got really bad.
Well, and Flip, dude.
Yeah, Flip's a good,
the Flip to Sam Mitchell, A and B. I mean, that's a
hands down. If Flip
the Smitch.
if Sam Mitchell had been
stupid,
sorry, that's all right.
If Sam Mitchell had been just better with the media, and maybe I think that does reflect how the fans see him. I think the narrative would have been he's a player here. He's one of us. We got to keep him around for one more year. And he kind of ran himself out of town.
They won. Did they win 29 games, 31 games, something around there?
31 was last year.
Yeah,
29.
I think so. Yeah.
I mean, I think had he been different with the media, the narrative would have been, "What else did you expect with this?"
Yeah, right.
And they picked it up at the end of that year. Zach LaVine really got going, if I recall.
Yep.
I mean, that could have been totally different.
So how about this? Do you need to like the coach, or do Wiggins and Towns need to be likable for?
Well, that's what matters. No,
right?
They need to like the coach.
Yes.
That's what matters, or at least believe
the most
in him.
important.
Because the fans can be really critical of the coach, and I don't think it matters. I think you can still have a likable team as long as they like the star players.
If it's clear that what is happening on the floor is something that is A, working, and B, the players are really engaged in and vocal about. I mean, this is the gold standard, but in San Antonio, Greg Popovich closes himself off, but the system works and the players swear by him. I think the players in Minnesota, like Jimmy Butler came out and actively defended Tibbs, for example, but they don't necessarily swear by him in the same way that they do in San Antonio. And part of that's just
pedigree.
Greg Popovich has multiple championships.
Don't the Warriors players swear by Steve Kerr, though?
Sure, but he's also accessible. So I'm trying to draw a parallel to another guy that isn't very accessible.
Yeah.
Tibbs can pull that off if he has established a culture that is, it's already there.
If Wiggins and Towns have the same mentality, Taj and
exactly. If it's clear that it's working, and there are still questions in terms of what, like I think Thibodeau is a good coach, but I think that there are still questions in terms of how certain young players have developed since he got there, and
that's what I was
part of that's on him, and part of that's on the players. But
and that's where the fans are justified,
right?
Is we've had 162 games of Tom Thibodeau as the head coach, and we are seeing issues prevalent in game that were there in game one. that have not.
Right.
The Grizzlies game looked like the Washington game that was like 90-87.
I'm talking about even a year ago. I mean, that was the if you want to, obviously the one area we can point to is the defense, is the issues that were prevalent on defense, of it not sinking in, of not gathering the system, of just being ineffective. That hasn't changed. Yep. And so, you know what? Fans have the right to say, you were brought in, and you were brought in as a defensive guru, and that shaped our logic to an understanding of, you're going to at least make us a middle of the pack defense. You've had 162 games, and they
had a 20-game stretch, right? 15-game stretch.
Yeah, that was very good. And that's it in the whole 162 games. Other than that, they've been a bottom 10 defense for every other stretch of the season, of the 2 seasons. And you know, I'm sorry, this is professional sports. Like, that's how it works. That's how it's entertainment. The fans get to engage, and if the fans have a somewhat legitimate beef and it's been prevalent for 2 years, like, we're going to hear about it. And then, you know what? It's on the coach and the players to change it. And if they don't, if they miss the playoffs this year, or if they miss the playoffs, that's kind of the worst case scenario. I want to hear some answers. You were supposed to come in here and change this. I understand Jimmy Butler got hurt, and that was a tough hand to be dealt.
Yep. But
Tom Thibodeau, what role did you play in this team not getting there? The answer has always been, we need to do more. We haven't more than enough. They need to step up and do it. No, what? Let's talk X's and O's. Let's talk about leadership. What happened here that made it so this team that has plenty of talent, using your own words, to win, why didn't they win? Mm-hmm. Answer that for me. And, you know, he's got 2 more games, take care of business, get in the playoffs, and you're going to get somewhat of a pass. But those questions deserve to be answered. It's been 2 years.
I think he gets a pass in these situations if you get 6 seed or above, because that should at least be a competitive series.
I mean, 6 seed's unlikely.
I think those questions need to be asked no matter what, because the defense has been.
That's entirely fair.
And I mean, I don't want to pick on one guy, but Andrew Wiggins still, like, we were talking about players that look the same now that they did last year. We were talking before the pod about the Denver game. Andrew Wiggins has clearly improved we've written about him a ton this year. Mm-hmm. Little individual pieces he's improved in. He's a better ball handler. He's a better passer.
Sure.
He's more active rebounding lately. He's been a good defender, I think, this year. Or at least a better defender than his statistics indicate. When the Wolves needed him against Denver, Butler was still out. Towns had fouled out. He didn't show up. And I think it's year 3 now. Is it year 3 or year 4? It's year 3.
Of Wiggins?
Or year 4.
Year 4,
It's year 4. And these problems still persist, and they're still there from year 1.
And he's entering a max contract.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, president of basketball operations, Tom Thibodeau, is the one that signed him. So, that's part of it too, is president of basketball operations, Tom Thibodeau, signs a guy to a max. You'd think that head coach Tom Thibodeau is going... Maybe he is. I don't know. Because, again, we don't have all the answers. But
that's a fair question to ask, though, too.
Like, Tom Thibodeau, you'd think, would go to Wiggins at that point in the Denver game and say, hey, man, I signed you max money. Like, you're making Russell Westbrook money. You need to go out there and attack the basket. And Towns is out. Butler's out. We need you right now. Mm-hmm. He wasn't there. I mean, it's great that he's improving on these little parts. And I really think his defense has come a long way this year. Mm-hmm. But that is a huge problem. The fact that he just won't show up in a game. And I think Tom Thibodeau
is at least in part to blame.
Exactly.
He is.
A lot of it is on Wiggins, but a lot of it is on
Sam
the coach.
Mitchell and Flip.
Yes.
Andrew Wiggins, yes, he's still somewhat lackadaisical, and there's a lot of issues he has himself. But part of Andrew Wiggins' lack of development, given his physical skill set, is on Tom Thibodeau, Sam Mitchell, and Flip Saunders for various different reasons. I think we could point flaws in all 3 of those coaches, but I mean, focusing on Tibbs, like there's things that need to be answered there, particularly when you throw in the max contract that did not have to be offered.
Yep.
It was a contract extension. Andrew Wiggins was not a free agent last summer. It would have been there's logic to the notion that Andrew Wiggins, you've played in the NBA for 3 years, and you haven't done much other than score 20 points a game. We're not willing to give you a contract extension. That's what the Lakers did with Julius Randle this year. They said, literally, Luke Walton has said to Julius Randle, we didn't give you a contract extension. Prove us wrong. And then
now he's having a career year.
And then you deal with it in the offseason, and the contract's for less, which benefits the team. Maybe you lose some points and not like having totally patted his back the whole time and saying we had not unabated faith in you. They didn't have to do that. Andrew Wiggins did not do enough in his first 3 years to say he had the max contract, and then they gave it to him, and then they didn't develop him. I mean, that's a huge...
And they were well aware of this, right? I mean, Glenn Taylor was famously criticized for pulling aside Wiggins and being like, dude, you know? Yeah. And he looks pretty justified in doing that right now.
Right.
And on the flip side, I think what you're getting at is Tibbs, at the end of the day, signed somewhere on that contract to make that work.
He
right?
signed the contract and he coached the player.
Yeah.
So, sorry, I mean, you're literally tied to it. And yes, to Tim's point, Andrew Wiggins, I don't subscribe to the Andrew Wiggins has like regressed this year.
No,
conversation.
I think he's improved.
I do.
He just should improve more. I think that's kind of it.
He should have improved more. There's a lot of things that don't make sense that his offensive efficiency has dropped, given that he plays with Jimmy Butler all the time. That doesn't. I mean, that's an issue.
See, I think part of that problem, and I think it's actually pretty fixable. He's still taking the same shots he's always taken. Mm-hmm. He hasn't taken the fact that he's taking on a worse defender and attacked the basket more, or waited for Teague or Butler to get him a shot deep.
I mean, it's a matter of basketball IQ.
It's still fadeaway, contested, step up, step back, whatever. Any kind of mid-range jumper, Wiggins is still taking those a lot. It's the majority of his offense, especially this year, because he's getting to the line less this year. Mm-hmm. He's attacking the basket less. Like, his percentage of shots in the paint is way down from the years in the past.
This is
absolutely
piggybacking off that a little bit. I think it's more Towns gives that goofy answer where you ask him, media day, hey, what have you worked on? He's like, everything, man, everything. Andrew Wiggins' answer next year should be 3-point shooting and free throws, right? If he hits threes, it's going to kind of open up some lanes for him, you would think. I know there's other things going on there, but if he's hitting free throws, he's more likely to draw contact, and then he's not just pumping mid-range.
I think part of it, coaching. We were talking about Tom Thibodeau for the last 20 minutes. I think Tom Thibodeau needs to say to Andrew Wiggins, you are done shooting mid-range jumpers unless you are wide open. 3-pointers, or attack the basket, or move the ball.
Mm-hmm.
I think that changes his game entirely.
And I know some people are going to hear that and be like, "Oh, Tim, you're being a
nerd,
like a nerd analyst." But that is so fair. And I know you don't mean like never ever shoot it. Like,
well, no. I mean, like,
within reason.
If he wants to take the Kobe fadeaway sometimes, I mean, that's fine. But like, it's the majority of his shots, and it's killing his efficiency.
And it's been 4 years of it now.
Yeah.
And so that's why I'm saying you're justified in being able to say that. Is you've had 4 years. You tried to be Kobe. You're not Kobe.
Yeah.
It turned you into Rudy Gay. You are Rudy Gay. Like,
like a slider Rudy Gay. Yeah.
It's not too late. He's 23. It's not too late to turn Andrew Wiggins into an all-star. Andrew Wiggins can be an all-star.
And there's games when he's knocking down threes, and I'm like, you could do that more often. Like, I understand he's in rhythm or whatever, but and then we see him at practice. Every practice, right? We walk in, they open it up to us. It's him working with 2 coaches on hitting free throws.
Yeah, every practice.
And that the only reason why that concerns me is both are kind of mentality, and I don't know who gets through to him. I mean, and
he said as much too. That has been mentality. I mean, it is wild that his free throw percentages. He was rookie year 76.0%, second year 76.1%, third year 76.0%. This year 64.3. He's literally was the same all 3 years. I mean, it's a little like a kicker or something.
I mean, I wrote about this like a month ago. Look at his splits for this year. Yeah. He was averaging the same number of free throw attempts as he always has in October and the beginning of November.
Yep.
And his free throw percentage dipped at some point in November, and his free throw attempts after that have been cut in half. I think he's scared to shoot free throws right now.
You know what another correlation to that is? You know who else was very passive at the beginning of the year?
Jimmy
Butler.
Yeah.
So I mean that.
Yeah. But even while Butler's been out, his free throw attempts haven't gone up.
No, yeah.
So I mean, like he's had passive Butler and been able to attack the basket the same rate he always has. And then with no Butler, he's at the same point that he was with like full-on MVP candidate Butler. So that's a problem. There's a lot of problems with this guy, but the underlying truth to all of this is he has physical tools that, like, when Jamal Crawford came on our pod, I've said this before, he said, like, the difference in actual talent between him and Towns isn't that far off. And, like, I could see how somebody that sees them practice every day could see that.
Best athlete, they said on the team.
I'm sure he's the best athlete on the team. And I think that's what's most frustrating. And he has a smoothness to his game when he attacks the basket that it's just really attractive to see, which is why, like, the shot selection, which again, part coaching, part playing, is frustrating because I think there's clearly something there, and if it's tinkered with the right way, I'm not saying I have the answer, but
and honestly, they've needed someone with more kind of aggression with Butler out late. You know, these kind of bad games they've had, which I would consider just barely beating the New York Knicks would also be in that category.
Barely beating Dallas.
Yeah. I go back to the Toronto game I covered here that Butler's out. This was before the meniscus. But
Marcus George's hunting revenge game.
Yeah, Marcus George's hunting revenge game. Yeah. Andrew Wiggins snarled at that Pirtle dude or whatever twice. And there was this like meanness to Wiggins you don't see much. I think he can tap into that if he's more aggressive and he's fine taking free throws and engaging contact, and kind of if he's hitting threes, because you can tell he does that and he gets going in some of those games.
Highlights make him snarl.
Yeah.
That's what it is. He dunked on Pirtle twice.
Yeah.
Jimmy Butler snarls because he gets a good defensive stop. Taj Gibson snarls when he locks somebody into dribbling off their foot. Andrew Wiggins snarls when he gets on House of Highlights. It's a disconnect. That is not the best practice.
The good thing for Cat, because I think Cat was in the Wiggins camp at the beginning of the year, he has learned to, as we're saying, snarl when he gets like a really tough offensive rebound, bodies his way into a guy that's bigger than him and hits a hook shot over him. So that's huge for him.
If Butler gets through to Wiggins is probably going to kindly before a game go, that guy's not going to score on me. Whoever it is, he has to guard, and then snarl when he doesn't score on him. I think that's kind of optimal Wiggins.
And all the way back to when we started this podcast, we were talking about Jimmy Butler's influence. In the second half of Friday's game against Los Angeles, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope didn't score, and Andrew Wiggins guarded him. And I mean, one of my favorite defensive possessions from Wiggins all year was on Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. He tried a myriad of moves that I bet in December would have worked on Wiggins, but Wiggins held his ground, stayed in front of him, blocked like a jump shot, which is really hard to do if you're a perimeter defensive player. Again, there's progress, but there's just these little things that need to be fixed, I think, to help him. And part of it's just general improvement, but part of it coaching and X's and O's. And use.
It is still correctable, but as every game goes on and every season goes on, you get to a point where you're like, okay, when? When?
Yep.
And first, I guess from a team perspective, it was like playoffs. Okay, when? And I mean, they're going to get there, or probably get there, but just because they get to the playoffs, or just because Andrew Wiggins shows something on defense for 2 quarters of a game, it's still, I mean, I don't want to be like the I'm never satisfied person, but it's still not enough. It's like consistency. There's got to be the consistency of everything, top to bottom, and that's
totally.
And I see it in other teams. I see it in other similar caliber teams. I mean, the other teams that are in the playoffs is those things that need tweaking. I feel like I've watched a lot of these New Orleans, San Antonio, Oklahoma City, Portland teams, Denver play recently over the past couple months because they've been in it, and it's different. It is. They're fundamentally like different teams, and yes, those other teams have their flaws. Denver still sucks at defense. I
mean,
New Orleans doesn't have the right positions on their team. Like
New Orleans is Anthony Davis, and then whoever shows up that night.
But still, you get something more out of that team, and it's those teams, and it's hard to put words in, but there's a more sense of a team when I watch those other teams play together, and when they're playing as a team, it rises the cream. It brings Damian Lillard up to getting MVP votes. It brings Anthony Davis up to do what he's been doing. And I think in Minnesota, when there's this disconnect, there's still a lot of talent that gets them some wins, but they're just not, it's not, I don't know.
Cohesive?
Yeah.
I hear you. Like, even San Antonio, they should not be as good as they are. Like, I think LaMarcus Aldridge has been great, but the reason that they're still where they are is because they play as a team. They move the ball like crazy.
Kind of all have the same mentality.
Yeah, exactly. They have the same goal in mind.
And that's a high standard to be held to, but you know, San Antonio is a high standard to be held to. What's happening in Utah, I don't think is, or New Orleans or Portland.
Well, they're playing to the same standard. Like, Utah doesn't have they're in the same boat as San Antonio in my mind, because I mean, LaMarcus Aldridge is leading them in scoring.
Utah.
They have a rookie in Utah as their go-to scorer. They're moving the ball and playing team basketball in the same way San Antonio is, which in a lot of ways is more impressive because there wasn't a culture already set there like there is in San Antonio. Ricky Rubio helped foster that, and Rudy Gobert is obviously the key to everything there, and Quinn Snyder's done an amazing job there. But they play as a team despite their flaws. The reason I didn't pick them to make the playoffs is because I didn't know who the hell was going to score for this team, but they play as a team, and they score as a team. And that's, I mean, not only is it really fun to watch, but it's really effective, especially when it's paired with that defense. That's why they're so good now. Yeah.
And the glass half full is that effectiveness can come for the Timberwolves.
Yes.
They do have more talent than Utah. They do have more talent than San Antonio. It's not there this year, but there is time. There's another off season. There's 3 more seasons on the Thibodeau contract. It's like it's possible that this team is able to put it together in the way that Utah does. And then because the Wolves have so much more talent, they're not going to be at the 4 seed plane. They're going to be, if they do that, they're going to be up there in the 1 or 2. They have the chance to be competing with the Golden States and Houstons of the world, and that's exciting.
Yep. Well, I mean, 2 more games. If they can play 70% of what we just described over these last 2 games against Memphis, who they haven't beaten yet, or Denver, who they've beaten twice.
Memphis, okay. Memphis is for sure going to have.
No.
Yeah, okay.
They were for sure going to win last time. I'm not doing that again.
But it'd be even more so now. Memphis is even more incentivized to lose. Later in the season, the game means more. Jimmy Butler's back.
Yep, they should win. They should absolutely win.
Yeah.
They haven't yet, so I'm not going to say anything yet.
Memphis is a half game behind Phoenix in the lottery standings too.
This is a big game.
Tankathon is on. So I'm assuming very much so a win in that game, and then it's at home for Denver.
Which may or may not matter. We'll see. I mean, may or may not matter in terms of getting in at all.
Yeah. I think it'll matter to some extent, though. Like, even if they're guaranteed and they're in for the 8th seed.
Well, then it's all seeding. Yeah.
I think there's a huge difference. If that Denver game is to be the 8th seed versus the 6th seed, that's still really important in my book. I mean, maybe not as important as making it, but I
think it's incredibly important.
I think
it's totally important. I just meant in terms of playoffs or not, but we'll see.
And it's going to be Nut Cup time.
That's a little ways away, but it's not that far. They play on Wednesday against Denver. They play on Monday against Memphis. So we'll have a podcast probably at the tail end of all that, right? Thursday, maybe.
Let's do it right away. Thursday.
We'll be back to podcast. So for Dane Moore at Dane Moore NBA, for Tom Schreier at T Schreier3, I'm Tim Faklis at TIMFAKLIS. This has been another edition of Wolves Wired. We'll see you next time.